What's $1 billion between friends? All this and more coming up on This Week in Retro.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology.
The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
Was the CDI doomed from the start?
Ross has saved your game. Stop Killing Games is looking great.
Streaming is so last year. Physical media is where it's at now.
And games you missed, along with the pre-order for the A1200 coming up on this week's show for the week of Saturday, the 28th of February, 2026.
Up-to-date news for out-of-date tech. Hello, everyone.
Hi, Chris.
Hello.
1,000 greetings to you, maybe 50 greetings to you, Chris.
Oh, yeah. Only 50. Okay, fair
Only
enough.
50.
And we have a guest this week, so 50 greetings to Ron. How you going, Ron?
I'm doing really well. Thank you very much for inviting me on. I'm a longtime fan, first-time caller, and I really appreciate the opportunity.
Fantastic.
Ron, you have a YouTube channel.
I do. As a matter of fact, it is Ron's Computer Videos, the very imaginatively named. And I try to focus on vintage Macintosh equipment, PC stuff, big box gaming, interviews. I've been doing a lot of that recently. So, yeah, it's a lot of fun.
And you're one of the, shall we say, resource forks behind the Marcintosh hashtag movement?
Yes, there's so many great sort of like events that happen during the year, like Septandy and December and things like that. And I figured that a couple of years ago that it'd be really nice to have one that kind of celebrates vintage Macintosh stuff. So it's runs the 1st of February, or I'm sorry, the 1st of March, take two, the 1st of March all the way to the end of March. And basically all the 68,000 PowerPC. And now that Apple has sort of turned their back on Intel era Macs. And yeah, if you're interested in learning more about the event, you can go to marcintosh.com for full event information.
I feel like we don't celebrate all of the themed monthly tags, which is probably why I have to ask this question. Does the one for the Mattel Aquarius, do they actually line it up with the Zodiac month for Aquarius? Because if they aren't, they're missing an opportunity.
I was like, I think at this point that we're in Pisces, so they may just be out forever at this point. I don't know.
Was there a fish-themed computer?
I don't know. I'm sure that maybe like Bassmaster or somebody might have came out with a fish finder.
The fish finder.
Yeah.
See, there's so many opportunities there. I bet one of those runs Doom.
Probably does.
Or Call of Duty. COD.
Nice. Or
COD of Duty.
It is, however, February today still. February still has a day left.
Oh, is that a thing?
Something arrived to me. I thought I'd mention it.
Oh, yeah.
This massive book from Kim Justice. I'm quite happy to see it. Looks lovely inside. It's a great big coffee table book called Arcade Decades. Loads of wonderful photographs of 80s arcade stuff. Just my cup of tea.
It's really nice. You add 4 legs and it's literally a coffee table book.
Yeah, I was thinking that.
It is huge. I mean, it is huge. You could easily set a cup of tea and a little plate with a scone on it. No bother.
One of those Space Invaders plates that we saw last week, maybe.
Oh, yeah.
One more before we move on. Ron, you've got a series of Apple employee interviews coming up this month. Can you tell us a little bit about that series and what people can look for a week after this episode comes out?
Absolutely. I was very lucky. I decided to kind of stack March with like former Apple employees, people that have connections to that world. So I've got a really great interview with Jimmy Minch, who is a longtime Apple engineer. He'll be on, I think, more towards the end of the month because that's a longer interview. I've also got an interview with Dr. Macintosh, Bob Levitas, who is sort of a long-time evangelist for Macintosh and Apple's clone program. He used to work for Power Computing for a while. And then I've also got a couple of interviews coming up with Mike Neal, who's another Apple engineer. He's also a former Microsoft employee that he's kind of like virtualization. He was kind of right there on the like the virtual PC and all of that and hypervisor. And then I've got a great interview with Charlie Kellner, who is an former Apple engineer. He also used to work for LucasArts. He's one of those like single digit LucasArts employees that he's actually kind of one of his claim to fame is he is the person that came up with the idea that when you turn on the Macintosh, it needs to make some kind of sound. So he was the guy that actually makes that little weird beep when the original Macintosh turns on.
What a claim to fame.
Yeah.
But yes, to your point, Dave, I have been reminded that we try to keep this to a 50-minute show. So let's do it. With as many bald guys as this show has always had, ever shall have, you'd think that we would make more of a point of firing off inspirational quotes from alpha bald legends, your Michael Jordans, your Telly Savalas and Yul Brynner types, maybe even a Donald Pleasance or a Vin Diesel. One of my all-time favorite bald character quotes comes from what I consider a flawed but wonderful episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation called Peak Performance. Now, in it, the android Commander Data, who allegedly has no emotions, is sulking because he lost a game to a weird alien and he's afraid he's malfunctioning and can't do his job, blah, blah, blah. Noted bald Starship Officer Captain Picard eventually gets tired of this and shows the android a way out of his sulky logic loop with one of the best coping quotes of all time. It is possible to commit no mistakes and still lose. It is not a weakness. That is not a weakness. That is life. Anybody else have any favorite Baldwin quotes they want to?
We're all born bald, baby. Who said that?
Well, I mean, the baby, you didn't have the lollipop, but is that a Kojak?
Yeah, it is. Terry Savalas, yeah.
Perfect. I thought of that Picard quote as I viewed the submission from Squelch411 this week. It's a 45-minute video on the Computer Clan YouTube channel entitled Philips CDI, the $1 billion failure. And thanks to the Deadlock episode guide for this show and my own quick research, I can tell it's been a while since This Week in Retro has featured the CDI, so let's have a look. The CDI, if you missed it or happened to put it out of your memory, was a multimedia console created by the company that defined the compact disc standard, Philips. And like everything CD-driven which preceded the original Sony PlayStation, it failed. Computer Clan host Crazy Ken goes through the development history of the CDI in an organized fashion, explains how the rise of the audio CD gave rise to data and mixed format CDs, and that CDI was a project in the making for many years before consumers first had a crack at it in 1991. Ken does a good job charting the delays and maneuvers which went from the planned launch in the mid-1980s to late 1991, when it actually hit stores, and spends just enough time on the hardware, which was a Philips-branded Motorola 68000 derivative, and the core operating system, the Microware OS 9, which started life on much more humble machines and is probably also something we haven't spent much time on This Week in Retro with. Now, what I didn't fully realize was that CDI was an official compact disc spec, along with other standards of compact disc, including what we would consider regular audio CDs, photo CDs, karaoke CDs. Now, sometimes you find out you have one of those CD plus G format discs completely by mistake, like I did when I put the first Information Society CD into my Amiga CD32 and was pleasantly surprised to get on-screen lyrics and band trivia. Did you guys ever run into like those, a surprise CDG or other mysterious behavior from kind of the heyday of overlapping CD formats?
I don't think so. I don't think I did. The one that I want to, that I keep getting tempted by is Super Audio CD, which is a bit of a later format, and I'm kind of enticed by that because it would open the door to me collecting more stuff.
I'm enticed by the opportunity to spend more on obscure media. Anybody else?
Yeah, I used to work next to a computer store that was right next to a used record store. And so at lunchtime, you could just go in there and borrow things. And you would not believe how many discs you would pop in that would just all of a sudden it would launch you into like a multimedia kind of experience because for promotional or whatever the band was trying to do at that time, I think people were just throwing stuff at the wall to see what would stick.
Nothing stuck.
Chris, anything?
No, I didn't even know CD plus G was a thing. So there you go.
So CDI could play games reasonably well, and it had support with an add-on card, much like the Amiga CD32 later had, for MPEG-1 video CDs, which honestly were always pretty smeary. But we knew, like, we should be impressed. We can pack an entire movie, or at least most of a whole movie, 80 minutes or so, onto a single CD. So if we got a chance to see one, we tried to be impressed. There's a partial tour through some of the more memorable and infamous CDI titles, and a reminder, this is in the long plateau of peak full-motion video gaming, with all the unflattering lighting on underpaid actors and who are wearing cheap costumes and wielding hastily assembled props.
This isn't an advert for your Shakespeare productions, is it?
Oh. No, but it is. It does tie into Compton's Interactive Encyclopedia, which he does spend time on. Now, Compton's Encyclopedia, apart from being the way that I get classier and older people to spell my last name correctly, is an interesting story because that was an organization that definitely saw the writing on the wall for traditional, we make tons of printed books, that we're a super high-end encyclopedia purchasing process company. And Compton's tried really, really hard to pivot to digital and remain successful. But like a lot of old media companies, even being a first mover did not really improve their chances or their staying power. So Ken reports that Philips shipped about 1 million consoles and lost about $1 billion on the whole process. Now, I kicked off this story with a quote about committing no mistakes and still losing. It would be hyperbole to say that Philips executed absolutely every element of their plan to perfection. But since Ken wraps it up with what he calls 4 reasons for Philips CDI's failure, I thought I would take those on and see just how bad those mistakes really were. So, his reason number 1, CDI took too long to come out. Ken specifically says he thinks that CDI would have been more successful if it had shipped for the Christmas 1987 season as originally planned instead of Christmas 1991. And he ties that into thoughts that things like the early software publishers like EA and Activision who had expressed interest, by the time CDI came out, they were no longer interested. Sticking to your schedules is important. Pushing things back by a total of 4 years, probably not good. However, as noted in the video, the launch price of CDI was quite steep, recommended retail of $1,000 US. Now, it does quickly fall to about half that and eventually goes lower still as time goes on and new models are introduced. That's still a lot, though. And there was also a not minor recession going on in the US throughout the early 1990s. So you've got tighter wallets plus questionable value proposition, not a great recipe for success. However, again, a much earlier release of CDI would have meant that the CDI would have been much more expensive at launch. Remember, Moore's Law is in full and unquestionable effect at this time. Every 18 months or so, you get dramatically more computing power per square millimeter of silicon wafer for the same price. Meaning, to get the same capabilities of that 1991 launch CDI 3 or 4 years earlier, your bill of materials is going to be way more expensive. So you're almost certainly going to have to compromise on the flash RAM, which was crazy expensive per kilobyte even in the early 1990s. That CPU, those helper video processors, those are also going to be way more expensive. So in short, I don't see how Philips could capture anything more than the eccentric millionaire and the over-the-top early adopter markets with a late 1980s launch. It almost certainly would have cost Philips at least twice as much to build, and those costs were absolutely going to be passed along to the consumer. So, did Philips take too long? Yeah, probably. The fact that the world's leading game publishers weren't there to participate when they're ready, that's not great. But was Christmas 1987 the right time to launch? With a retail price that would have easily been at least twice as much, I simply cannot see it. So here I disagree with Ken. His point number 2, it was positioned wrong. So the brief argument presented here was that instead of positioning it as a multimedia machine, they should have just said, this is for games. And maybe. The argument works, or at least looks tidy, if you point to a success like, let us say, the Sony PlayStation, a machine that unapologetically tells you, hello, I am here to help you play games. But let's not forget, the Atari 2600 was originally positioned and branded as the VCS, the Video Computer System, and it promised to play erudite games of chess and teach you basic programming, even though it made for a singularly terrible computer.
Yeah, I think the conceit of this is for more than just games is reasonable, and you would want to position your product as that, but everybody knows that games things are just for games. Look at the state of the games industry in 1987. The games that were coming out would not have, if you look at the 90s and the transition to CD games at that point, they really struggled. It took until the PlayStation came along until they worked out how to do it. Trying to do that in 1987 would have been daft.
And I wasn't even going to get into it, but since we're talking about this, your development machines would have been 4 years less powerful as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's a lot. Yeah. There's a lot that would have made it tougher. Ron.
I do like it when game companies try to shoehorn in the idea that this is now a multimedia educational tool on a very clearly games sort of setup, sort of like Nintendo when they with the entertainment system make it look like a VCR for the United States market, but then overseas actually have a keyboard that plugs in the front so that you could do basic programming and things like that. It's just we all know you could stop pretending that this is anything other than games.
Yeah. And I'll come back to the Nintendo a couple times. Right. Atari VCS, biggest success of its generation, just ahead of the Intellivision, marketed as the Intelligent Television System. It also promises an ability to become a computer. And then, yes, that original Nintendo, biggest success of its generation, marketed, to Ron's point, as the Nintendo Entertainment System. And I do think, and Ron, feel free to back me up here, I think the lesson of this positioning has been mangled over time. Like, that was about appeasing the retail store chain purchasing professionals who were extremely upset about taking massive losses on video games earlier. This was not about American consumer preferences, guys. Let's just be clear. But it's also pretty clear that everybody involved in like the buying and the keeping of those systems, right, they knew it was for awesome, fun games like Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt and Excite Bike and so on. So I'm going to say that the pretty meh titles that were available for the CDI at launch, rather than the positioning of the system, is the real issue here. So I'm going to call this a mostly disagree.
Fully disagree.
His point number 3, underpowered hardware. So I'm going to say, like, fair enough point in that the CDI spec was, to his point, years old at this point and perhaps could have been improved. Although Ken also noted that Philips was future aware enough to include that expansion bus to accommodate the eventual MPEG-1 decoder card, and that enables that video CD support. But again, I got to go back to the bill of materials argument. A more powerful machine would have cost more powerful dollars. So I'll mostly agree here. Like, the kind of hardware that you could have put in this box and sold for any kind of reasonable price just was not going to be convincingly better than, let's say, spending half that money on a cartridge-based console and a few games.
The point here would be, don't do the project rather than do the project differently. Sometimes,
or kind of accept that you're part of the R&D community and you help things move along, which is an attitude that if you're a multinational conglomerate, you can take.
Which was where you were going with Captain Picard's quote. Sometimes, yeah, I get it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just build on what you've learned by failure. So
yeah, or sometimes you couldn't have won,
right.
Which is perhaps the case here.
And Ken's point number 4 was that they tried doing too much. So Ken asserts that a platform should do one thing and do it well before evolving into something else, and points to, again, things like the PlayStation as an example of doing that, focusing on being a great game console first and then expanding out. Any of you guys have or remember those early stage PlayStations before they started cost reducing that parallel port out?
Mm-hmm.
You guys remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
My nephew had the first edition. Yeah.
Yep. Sony was trying to make the PlayStation into an expandable Wonderbox 2. They just happened to have the combination of being good and lucky, and they caught fire on the game front. Or to go back to Nintendo, like things like the Power Pad, that floor controller thing you stomped on, like that didn't confuse people or dilute the core value proposition. People knew it was mostly for playing games with a handheld gamepad.
Look at the Wii. I mean, the Wii had so many different things to do on it that didn't kick the legs out. I hope you weren't about to say that. I'm not stolen your point, but it didn't kick the legs out of it as a games console.
No, the Wii is almost the opposite example, where all the gimmickry that like the Dreamcast tried to do, and people were like, but do I need to play a maracas game? I don't know that I need that. Nintendo just leaned into everything about this as a gimmick, and people said, thank you. Yeah, Ron.
Yeah, I was going to say, we have entire landfills dedicated to Wii accessories. So real testament to their success.
I didn't know about the landfills full.
I wonder if there's a whole landfill dedicated to Guitar Heroes.
Oh, yeah.
Probably. Yeah. So Ken is right that CDI did not have the clearest value proposition in the world. The fact that, as he cites in some of the video, the fact that Philips was using long-form infomercials on late-night television to try to sell it may be a point. Maybe that they didn't have a crystal clear reason for being if you need that much time to convince people. But I actually don't think that there was anything wrong with trying to catch the wave of CD-ROM productivity in the form of encyclopedias and edgeware and be a game platform. I don't think that was too much for Philips to take on. It just didn't work. A lot of things at this time didn't work. And CDI was hardly the only casualty of this early wave of CD-ROM consoles. So on this point, that's a firm disagree from me. So do you guys have any personal favorites among those CD consoles of the early years? The PC Engine CD-ROM 2 / TurboGrafx CD, the CDI, Sega CD, Amiga CD-TV, and later CD32. We'll even count the 3DO in this. And then stuff that I've only ever heard of, like the Bondi Playdia and the FM Towns Marty. I'd only heard of the Playdia while researching the story. I'd never run into that before.
I'm a big fan of the original PlayStation. And I think that when you think about CDI and you think about Philips' involvement kind of in all of that, they were very much pioneers of trying to, get this into people's homes. And unfortunately, it's that classic thing of pioneers get the arrows, settlers get the land. So, we needed a CDI to be out there so that the PlayStation could really take off and very much dominate that market. Same thing with, I am a huge fan of the TurboGrafx 16. Because I had a PC Engine suitcase back in the day and all of that, and a lot of games, and it was really, really neat. I'm a huge fan of that, and they thankfully just leaned in that this is just a games machine. So I would say, for that era, that's where my fandom is for sure.
I think the one that came closest was the 3DO. It nearly almost made it. It was almost 2 or 3 months behind in the price cuts from where it should have been. It nearly made it, but I don't think any of them were before you got the PC CD-ROM games and the PlayStation. I don't think any really succeeded. I saw the CDI though fairly early on at a friend's house. His dad worked for Philips quite high up, and I wasn't impressed at all with the CDI. I'm trying to place it in time. I think it would be 1992, so not long after its launch. I don't think it was pre-launch, although that wouldn't be impossible given how high his dad was up in Philips. But the CD stuff falls into 2 categories, I think. The first is where the CD technology is the whole point of it, where they say, we've got these CDs, how do we use them? And where it's been used as a multimedia invention, and they're trying to build something on top of that with FMV and all the rest. And the second category is where the CD is just the most convenient way to distribute stuff. Remember, we're moving from games in MS-DOS would ship with less than 10 discs. You wouldn't go above 10. 1.2 megabyte, 3.5-inch discs. You're realistically looking at a game that topped out at 10 megabytes and not more. And then you move on to CDs, and all of a sudden you've got 650 megabytes. And of course, games by then were already tight on space, so they were compressing things and cramming stuff on discs and cutting stuff out. But maybe if they didn't have to do that and they relaxed, they'd only be looking at 25 megabytes. So it took this period of time between games which would have been nowhere near filling a CD. And in fact, if you're an Amiga CD32 fan, you'll know exactly what that looks like. If you look at the actual disc, when you see it's just a floppy disk game on a CD-ROM. But we went from this period where they didn't know what to do with them. They stuck on Red Book audio tracks, but it took years and years to work out how to use these things. So Philips launching something so expensive without an existing games ecosphere there for it, for example, then it just didn't work. But I think the first category is where it's mostly dead ends. The CDI that I saw was underwhelming. The FMV stuff was a fad, really. In fact, even the cutscenes, the pre-generated cutscenes, were kind of gone by the mid-90s. So, yeah, even when the technology was basically free in CD players and DVD players, I just didn't think it caught on.
Ron, did you have more?
Yeah, I was just going to say that CDI does have something that, when you get caught in that cost analysis argument, that really, if the CDI had been able to ship with the MPEG add-on, I think it would have been a different world, because that would be that your baseline machines would have had more processing power to be able to do some of those things, like you're saying, where it's like you needed the big impressive stuff to make this, even something that would interest consumers. So the killer app for CD-ROM has to be The Seventh Guest. And the Philips CDI has the best version of Seventh Guest because of the MPEG card. It has the highest resolution version of the game available on any console, and has a lot of exclusive, sort of content compared to like the US and Europe, even European CD-ROM releases on the PC. So there are some experiences there that were kind of unique, especially at the time. So I would say that if they would have had more hardware, if they would have been able to kind of bridge that gap, it probably would have done a lot better.
I've just had a check, and it's 1993 that Seventh Guest came out. So you'd have to have that killer app at launch. I think you'd have to have people saying, "I need this. I absolutely need this." It doesn't exist already, but it was the games were iterating on each other and progressing to a point where they could use the CD. And at launch, they just didn't do it. And the idea in 1987 being able to do this is just wildly wrong. So I completely agree with Jason on it.
Yeah, true. For me, I think this era of CD consoles is a bit like how VR has always been, in that we know it's a thing. We know it's meant to be better than what we've got. We don't really understand why. And a lot of the time, the early developers don't understand why and don't know how to show it off. And so the systems fail. And I think that's what's happened to pretty much every single early CD system. I worked in game. That was when the CD32 was out. And we had CD32s, the Panasonic 3DO, the CDI, and none of them impressed me, right? None of them. As a gamer, none of them impressed me. So the standout for me that I'm going to pick from the list, and I would have picked it anyway, is actually, it predates the CDI only just. It came out in March 1991, and it's the Commodore CD-TV. But at the time, I didn't really get why it should be good. And opinionated teenage me was like, meh. And sorry to John, the owner of Megabytes, my independent computer shop at the time, but demonstrating the CD-TV using Psycho Killer was not the way to entice my friends and I to begin saving for yet another Amiga 500, only this time in a black box. But now I friggin' love the CD-TV. I'd argue it's the pride of my collection, and it sits at the bottom of a period-correct hi-fi stack, not on a desk pretending to be a desktop PC. And it's only now, all these years later, that why I appreciate it is I appreciate what it really was and how far ahead of the curve it was. Because not only was it, one of the first CD-ROM based systems, but it was a genuine push to bring gaming and computing into the lounge on the big TV, plugged into the big stereo. And actually in that setting, it's a stunning piece of tech. But here's my criticism of what developers did at the time as well. Other than, like Dave said, they just push regular existing games onto a CD format. Or they go too far the other way and they try and shove poorly produced, very poorly made, and poorly running full motion video onto that same disc and call it a game. What very few games actually did was make, and this is important for an Amiga platform, was make use of CD audio. So one of the best titles on CD-TV is Xenon 2, because it's as playable as the Amiga version, but instead of the Amiga Paula chip playing the music, you're getting CD audio music, leaving all 4 channels for game sound whilst the music plays, and it's better music, but very few games bothered to even do that. And that, in my view, and that pushed forward to the CD32 era as well. That's just criminal. What a waste of space.
So to my original premise, was the CDI the commander data in the example at the beginning? Did it commit no mistakes and still lose? Probably not. Timing, developer relations, marketing, those all play a role. And they're always something that can be done a little or a lot better. I do think that CDI's failure was less about execution than it may appear. But in any case, don't weep too hard for Philips. The 1990s were overall very good to the large enterprise, despite some of their earnest R&D effort, which failed to pay off like the CDI. They're doing just fine, even to this day. And, I remember when record labels were really starting to sweat over piracy and ripping to MP3 and so forth, and they were, threatening to find new and exciting DRM measures to slap on audio CDs. Philips took a stand and said in so many words, well, go ahead, but doing that is going to vary from our specifications. So if you do that, you can't use the official compact disc digital audio name and logo on your packaging, which I do remember admiring at the time. As a side note, when I first watched this video, YouTube served me an ad from Philips, which is pretty funny when you think about it, but is also a testament to Philips being a big and resilient enough company that a billion-dollar misadventure now and then can't hurt it too badly.
We are sponsored this week by PCBWay.com. PCBWay are the world's premier PCB manufacturing service, just like Pixel Addict, the premier British magazine. PCBWay will make you a PCB. They will also do CNC milling. They will do 3D printing. You can get them to pick and place your PCB. So if you have a project, they can deliver the whole thing for you. So thank you very much for sponsoring us. But one of the things that we like to highlight about PCBWay, our favourite thing about them, is the shared projects. And Jason, have you been looking at them this week?
Yeah, it's basically a social media platform and resource sharing, depot all in one. So a few interesting shared projects this week. There's the Temp Gun Pro. That's a handheld open source infrared temperature capture gun powered by an ESP32 C6 display and a custom circuit. was it about 10 years ago or so, maybe a little bit more, that everybody was getting, temp, guns, and they were all becoming heatsink experts. They would just open everything up and go, oh, I'm going to need to put a fan on that. I'm going to need to put a heatsink on that. Oh, look at what's happening over here. Well, if you missed that wave and you want to get into it now, the Temp Gun Pro up there on PCBWay may help you out. Also, there's the ARPS 2. That's an Arduino-compatible robot project shield for the Arduino Uno. And this guy looks like he's a little two-wheeled robot, and he's got some programmable capabilities. He's going to take a few batteries to wheel him around. There's the educational starter configuration or the robot starter configuration, and additional customizations available there. Again, these are things that you can either order as they are or download and improve upon if you have that skill set. And then a fun little thing, maybe to plan ahead for next year's holiday festivities, the transparent snowflake Christmas PCB badge. It's a nice little light up ornament suitable for hanging off of your tree, your wreath, any of your decorative items. It's got the little PCBWay logo on there. I bet you could customize that away if you wanted. There's a Christmas tree shaped one, all sorts of fun little decorations if PCBs are your way of expressing yourself over the holidays.
Thank you for sponsoring us. It's been many months since we talked about the massively important Stop Killing Games initiative. And as I said back last time we discussed it, we're not going to do weekly updates. We'll wait for some big news. Well, I'm pleased to say there is a big update, and for the most part, it is positive sounding. Now, we are very interested in preservation here. It's vital. Games are art. They are our culture. And this campaign is to try and save them. What's been happening is that games are released and sold to the public, and they have a secret expiry date, which the publisher or retailer won't tell you or can't tell you. When that expiry date arrives, when they decide, the game is taken from you. It's disabled. You no longer own it, and you're no longer able to play it. Now, this isn't just online games. This isn't World of Warcraft or even a MUD. These are games with significant single-player parts. You obviously can't expect them to run online servers forever for a World of Warcraft or whatever, but you can, for a single-player game, expect to own the game after you bought it. The big example that was used when the campaign launched was called The Crew. It was released in 2014, and it was sold up to December 2023. So you could have bought this game in December 2023, and then 3 months later, Ubisoft killed the game off, making the single-player part of it unplayable, meaning that if you bought this game, then 4 months later, you didn't own it anymore. They took it away from you. They cancelled your ownership of it. And you had nothing to show for it. And apparently you had no recourse. But there's lots of other examples. BioShock, for example, if you have the original media, needs an online activation and the server is gone. Darkspore, Might and Magic 10 Legacy, Shadowrun, Hellgate London, loads of examples of this stuff. Now, the campaign started around 2 years ago, and initially people seemed to agree with the premise of it, but were quite pessimistic, thinking this isn't going to change anything. And I'm pleased to say that the updates are positive. There's a critical meeting coming up with the EU, and there's concerns that the EU have already decided to go with self-regulation, which is telling the game publishers to sort it out themselves rather than rolling this into the upcoming Digital Fairness Act. There was what seemed to be a leaked statement which looked like they'd already decided what they were going to say, but it's not clear if that was true or not. But the leaked statement indicated it was going to be a token gesture or self-regulation, but who knows if that's true or not. That decision is due by the end of July. The Digital Fairness Act itself is due later this year. It's aimed at dark patterns, addictive design, and unfair contract terms. Now, Ross says he's been told that there's a majority in Parliament in support of this in the EU Parliament. Now, Ross is the guy that started this campaign off. Much bigger than him now, but he started this off. He's done fantastic on it. There's also 2 NGOs being launched, 2 non-governmental organisations being launched, one in the EU and one, surprisingly, in the United States of America, where the consumer law doesn't protect people just now. Well, in the EU, consumer law doesn't protect you, but it should. Whereas in the US, consumer law doesn't exist that should protect you. Whereas in the EU, the argument is that the legislation already exists and that publishers and retailers are not adhering to it. And that's where the hope is. If they're taken to court, they will start to lose, and they'll face significant costs opposing this. So it's felt in the EU, this legislation exists, and the NGO will be there to try and pursue this legislation, saying, no, you sold this, you have to honour it. Whereas in the US, it'll be to raise awareness and hopefully get legislation passed. In the EU, there's two things that the publishers seem to be falling short on. The first is that under EU Directive 2019/770, digital content must remain in conformity for a period a consumer can reasonably expect. And that's them saying, look, you can't just pull the rug out and say you don't own this anymore. And the second is that EU LA clauses, the things that nobody's ever read because who's got the time, but EU LA clauses that allowing a publisher to terminate access at any time for any reason are likely illegal under existing EU consumer protection laws, as they create a significant imbalance between the company and its consumer.
Dave, I apologize if I'm getting ahead of something, but in your research, have they talked about what that, the consumer can reasonably expect period might be? Like, are they thinking the lifespan of the console or of the console generation? Okay.
No, and this is the difficult part. People have been putting this to the equivalent of trading standards, the various different places in the EU constituent countries, and saying, what does this mean? And getting a different answer if they phone in the morning to the answer if they phone in the afternoon, because there's no consistent answer here. There's legislation is there, but it's not being followed or enforced. So it's unclear what it really means, and this is where the court cases would come in. So this is what the NGO in the EU would be attempting to do, is pursue these and say, look, you cancelled the sale of something and you haven't refunded the person. You need to refund them, or you need to take reasonable steps. Now, Ross had a really interesting point here. He talked about why he understands that game publishers will spend a great deal of money and effort trying to protect their businesses of pushing microtransactions onto gambling addicts and children. Now, that's their bread and butter. And where they make money from. So that's why they're spending all the money protecting that business. But if they're no longer able to do it, they'll lose billions. However, on the other hand, if they take steps to make a game reasonably playable once its commercial life is over, the cost is peanuts in comparison. And that's Rossi's point. It would cost them less to put some kind of sunset clause in the game where it says, okay, at the end of its commercial life, we'll turn off the servers, but we'll put a little update out that means the game can run single player without connecting to it. That's all the people are asking for. So Ross explained that he was frustrated with the industry seemingly spending more money fighting this than it would cost to put it in place. And let's be clear about it. What we're asking for is, when it's been brought up before, there's been lots of tedious comments from people who misunderstand it. Publishers are not being strong-armed into running servers forever and running services forever. But when they do turn these servers off, people must be left with a game that is reasonably playable. So that means if it requires online activation, or it requires to be always online, or whatever, then that should be patched out at the end of the life. Or if there is a single-player part and an online server part, then kill off the online part. You have to, but leave the single-player elements behind. Now, obviously, Ross goes into much more detail in his update than I can here. I hope I've done a good job of making a summary of it, but Ross, even Ross is doing a summary of what's happening there. So if you want to know more, watch Ross's video. It's about half an hour long. It's quite engaging. What do you think, Chris?
It's ironic that this was kicked off by the crew, and let's just face it, this is the first game that people have jumped on and gone, this isn't fair, right? It will happen to other games, absolutely. It was a launch title for the PS4. It's one of the games that I wanted a PS4 to play, but ironically, I never ended up buying it. That happens a lot. I just love the idea of having the whole of the USA pretty much to Cannibal Run across. But it's from the design team that brought us Test Drive Unlimited 1 and 2, which also featured massive player maps. Test Drive Unlimited was the whole of a Hawaiian island, and number 2 included that plus Ibiza to drive around. And in number 2, they added online multiplayer, but you didn't have to play online. You could play offline. So that's a good example. This was the same team, right? Same dev team. The franchise is now survived by the 2024 release of Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown on PS5, Xbox Series X and S, and on Steam for PC. And guess what? That game it's marketed as always online, so you must have a connection to the servers to play it. Same franchise. And that was not the case with Test Drive Unlimited 1 or Test Drive Unlimited 2, even though you had an online mode in the second one. And Test Drive, this is what frustrates me a bit, because Test Drive goes way back to the era of the Amiga and the ST, our wheelhouse. So it's one of the longest running franchises, and the crew is 100% a spiritual successor to this series. So making this issue all the worse for me, because this franchise hails from a time way before Always Online was even a thing. But there's another that should know better that has me worried, right? And it's Elite Dangerous, which again, I think could have been developed from day one so that solo mode didn't even require an internet connection. But it does. You cannot play Elite Dangerous offline, even if you're playing in solo mode. And in fact, so I originally got it for the PS4. That version is no longer supported. So we're seeing this sort of play out. And whilst you still can play it, basically it's sort of frozen at Horizon Update 3.8. It has to connect to the Elite Dangerous or the Frontier server to activate, even if you're playing. Well, you have to play the solo mode now on PS4. So you don't get the updates, you don't get the storyline, but they still force you to connect to play the game. If your internet's down, you cannot play Elite Dangerous on the PS4, even though it's now legacy. So eventually those servers will go dark and you will have an unplayable game, which I think is a real shame for a game that is built on the legacy of a game we, had it back in 1982. Ron?
Well, I hate the idea as a consumer that we have to, continually hold these companies to task to make it to where we can continue to use the things that we have already paid for. So consumer protection laws are very important. I would certainly like to see some sort of rules that would say that if a company is going to sort of downgrade game experience for people, that they have to make those components open source or release the ability for other people without having to reverse engineer how that game experience worked. Make that to where people can then roll up their own online servers to keep those communities alive. I know that a big problem are games that are tied to some sort of intellectual property. So the big one I would bring up would be that had a bad history. Gun Media's Friday the 13th, which was an online. I mean, it did have some single player things, which was very much slapped on at the last minute, is what it felt like. But it was a multiplayer online game where somebody plays as Jason and people play as counselors, and they turned that off when they lost the IP rights for it. So it wasn't profitable to keep it running. And so basically it killed a really vibrant game community that had risen up around that. So, but maybe some consumer protection laws that would say, hey, like you have to be thinking about how this is going to continue to work in 2 years, just because you didn't have the foresight to not partner with a company that has 30 people all claiming that they own this intellectual property.
Sorry, I was just smirking over here when Ron was describing the plot of Friday the 13th. So Dave and maybe Chris by extension. So when an American says, that Jason is chasing around counselors, like, do you think of, local town councilors?
I just think of you as a murderer, Jason.
Also valid.
He is chasing around counselors, but it's to keep the game online in the service of protection to consumers. It's trying to make an appointment with his local MP.
Yeah.
Have you ever murdered anyone, Jason?
No. I will flatly deny that. Thank you. The headline item here, I believe, Chris, is that for every 50 racing games you do buy, you'll let one go by?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Or for every 50 launch titles, I'll only buy one.
I was good the other way around. Like, you're going to buy 50 racing games and, let that 50 first go by. But.
Yeah, pretty much.
Another thing that occurred to me in listening to this is some of this will get better over time as, frankly, legislators and judges get older. Like, it's just generational change. The bad old days of having to explain to, decrepit old senators that the internet is a series of tubes, that's going by. And yes, our generation will struggle with, whatever, cyberpunk-esque, software directly implanted in brains. But as people our age and younger, become legislators and judges, it's going to be easier to get maybe a little more fair protections.
You say that as if we're young, Jason. We're not anymore.
We're young by comparison.
Yeah, we are. We're true.
Young by comparison.
True.
Yeah. And there's also a balance here. And Dave, you did speak to this some. And I think sometimes people, you may have to face, do you want your money back or do you want your games to last forever? You might not get the latter all the time. I do appreciate what you're saying, Dave, that sometimes patching it out will be fine. But there may be times when it's just not going to happen. And instead,
it has to be reasonable. I mean, there's things like, for example, game comes with DLC that you can no longer activate online. That kind of thing. That can be patched. They have to design these games. They should be forced to design these games with an end strategy in place that's reasonable. There shouldn't be an attempt. I know, Ron, you brought up open sourcing stuff. And I get the appeal of that, but can you imagine if we forced companies to open source the stuff they were using for Test Drive Unlimited 1 when they were building the second game on top of that? That would be a significant detriment to them. That's not necessarily fair. But yeah, when they design a game like The Crew, for example, they say, okay, when we stop selling this, when we're going to sunset it, when it's the end of thing, we'll flick this switch and people will only be able to do the single player stuff. And I think that's reasonable. It has to be reasonable. It shouldn't be the case that companies are forced to do ridiculous things. And it might even result with GTA, for example, saying, okay, we licensed all these music tracks for the games, but we only licensed them we couldn't perpetually license them. So we licensed them for 10 years. So at the end of 10 years, you won't have access to those. And that may be quite reasonable.
I think there could be a downfall there, though, because if you say, well, I only licensed this game from the developers for X number of years, like at some point you got to say, like, well, that's not the consumer's problem. But yeah, I do get what you're saying. Ron?
Oh, I was just going to clarify. I meant the networking component. So
yeah, the back end.
Right. If they never
usually
did,
that's simpler.
I mean, I'm not looking for the entire source code for Halo, but it's probably online somewhere. Yeah. But I am saying that the ability for people to play Halo CE on private servers, if they had never released a way to do that, I think they should be legally compelled to do that. If you look at things like, I will say Star Wars Galaxies, I invested a lot of time in playing that kind of in the early 2000s. And Sony announced that basically that they were going to go ahead and shut things down. Well, what people had been doing for nearly a decade is sniffing all of the network traffic to figure out how the back end of that worked, and were able to roll up pre-combat upgrade servers, pre-NGE, new game enhancement servers, things like that. So people that wanted to play those other experiences still could after Sony had moved on. And now you can literally, now that game has been shut down and only existed as a multiplayer experience, people can still go back and play those games because of people just taking the law into their own hands. So it would be nice for companies to be like, hey, we're just not going to use this IP anymore. You've invested a lot of time and trouble and a lot of your personal life in this thing. It'd be nice for people to be able to continue to play that.
And just my last thought, I know, Dave, you want to wrap this up, but with Elite Dangerous, like maybe the plan all along, was to do that kind of thing. And when you've got a scenario to Chris's point of, well, it's legacy on the PS4, you can't buy it on the PS4 anymore, but it is still sold on other platforms. That's a pretty wonky area, but it would be nice to see. It would be nice to see a solution that everybody can live with.
Yeah, and it has to be equitable. I know a lot of people will go for the very most in favor of the consumer, and that's not necessarily sustainable. Anyway, I wish luck to this campaign. I hope it does well. We will give updates again when they're significant. Thank you very much to Ross for doing this. His video is linked in the show notes. Have a watch if you're interested.
On to housekeeping. Want to thank More Fun Making It for joining our Patreon as an annual supporter. Really appreciate that, Lee. If you are interested in joining him and our many other supporters at the monthly or annual levels, please visit patreon.com/thisweekinretro. We've had monthly updates exclusively for subscribers lately. We have another episode of 260 Weeks Ago in retro that will be out by time you see this. And then in March, we're going to do something a little bit different. The three of us are going to get together and share some top fives. So please join us there.
Probably. Last week, just before we recorded, we learned of the passing of Hideki Sato. He is one of the most incredible people in the retro industry. He joined Sega in 1971 and worked in the electromechanical games. So this is arcade games before the microprocessor. And then he worked on the development of the first microprocessor and then worked his way up through the R&D division of Sega until the 80s, when he started designing Sega consoles, and he did them all. He started by designing the SG-1000 and the Master System, the start of their consoles. He then moved on to make the Mega Drive, or actually launched as the Mega Drive, my best attempt, and known in Japan apparently as the Mega Dora. And then he worked on the Saturn and finally the Dreamcast. And when Sega stopped making hardware, he stepped up to be president of Sega, during arguably the most difficult period that Sega had ever had between 2001 and 2003. And it's probably down to his leadership that ensured that Sega's cast of characters and franchises didn't end up being split up and sold, and that they're still existing and as a non-hardware place. So a fantastic career, a fantastic amount of stuff. And amazing. So thank you very much for submitting that to subreddit. And Hideki Sato. Yeah. 50.
50 cats going by in the background.
Yeah. We said 50 a few times. And Duncan spilled the beans just before we recorded that it's his 50th birthday today. Now, I don't know if everyone's aware who Duncan is. Duncan is the longest tenure of anyone here. Duncan's been here since almost the start. He does the producing, the editing. He does enormous amounts of work to give you something to look at, besides our baldy heads as we talk. And he turns 50 today. Now, we were tipped off by his mate Simon. Simon reached out through Heber, through Neil at RMC, and finally to us, just wanted to make Duncan smile. What a nice thing to do, Simon, just to make Duncan smile. He talks about how he's been a friend of Duncan since they had the Amstrad CPC, and Simon has Spectrum. They both went on to get the Amigas. But Duncan, happy birthday, mate. Happy birthday. I hope you have a great 50th.
Happy birthday. And Simon, that was the problem. Too many people in the conspiracy. Duncan decided to just short-circuit it and share his own news.
About 2 minutes before we started recording, Duncan casually measured it. So that mentioned it. So we knew, Duncan. We knew already.
Yeah, he's the guy with the hair in the logo, in case you've ever wondered.
Surprise.
Yeah. It is a particularly busy week on the subreddit. So here are the highlights for News and Brief. Pajako6502 shares a Tom's Hardware article about a service offered by the SDF Public Access Unix System and the Interim Computer Museum. It's a web-based text gateway which offers access to 28 different classic mainframe and mini computers. Now, mini computers are big computers, don't be fooled. Running things like Multics, TOPS 20, ITS, and OpenVMS, along with flavors of Unix and BSD. We'll provide a link to the service in the show notes, of course, but it looks like it might be creaking under the hug of so much interest, so you may need to be patient.
Colony Activist shares a table of pre-2010 console games that are commercially available, and it's grim. Between 87% and 97% of games released for these consoles can't be bought now. We've covered these numbers before when they came out in 2023, and it shows just how vital preservation is. That is depressing. 2010 is still current as far as I'm concerned. Far out.
I've not caught up yet in 2010.
Did I say 2010? I meant 2010.
And the pre-order for the A1200 is now up. The UK price is apparently £170, including delivery, but US $264 with shipping when I went to look that up. But if you want to put that in, we'll include the retrogames.biz URL as well.
And I thought it was already pre-ordered, but I'm not sure. I'm guessing not.
I pre-ordered mine months ago.
I thought I saw it on
from
Amazon
EB
as well.
Games.
Yeah.
Yeah. Heaps of people have already pre-ordered.
You
Anyway.
can pre-order again. There you go. We should get paid for that. Dolphin Emulator, which is a GameCube and Wii emulator, can now emulate Triforce games. So Triforce was an arcade board joint venture from Nintendo, Sega, and Namco, based on GameCube hardware from around 2003 to 2007, roughly. Some Virtua Striker games, some Mario Kart, and a few others. So thank you, Sheepy Tina, for letting us know about that.
Darth Lovejoy links us to a nice doco to watch, the 35th anniversary of Lemmings from On a Retro Trip. An hour and a half of the little guys. The doco has interviewed Russell Kay, Scott Johnston, and Tim Wright from DMA Design, but thankfully not Mike Daly. Sorry, Mike, I did not put that in the notes. But no, they don't interview Mike Daly.
I wonder who put that in the notes. I wonder who put that there.
A new project called Attaboy, which is a way to connect IDE drives to USB. It's an open source project, and it will work with older CHS-only drives, which a lot of those cheaper devices you'll get on Amazon and other tech retailers don't. So if you have an old drive with some data, it might help you get at it from a nice, convenient, modern USB interface.
And a weird thing linked by Pajako. On first glance, it just looks like a gamepad, but it's actually a flight stick, not a fight stick, a flight stick in gamepad form. It looks wild, but it also looks to me as if it would be decent to use. It's got throttles and brakes and all sorts of stuff on it, and you'll control it with the normal kind of thumb thing that you would do. But yeah, it looks absolutely wild.
It's got toggle switches down the bottom. I'm just having a look and getting very excited by that. Oh, yeah. That looks good.
Quantum Bovril tells us that he's the brother of It's Me Thyroid, and that he's proud to share that his brother now has a column in the revived Computes Gazette magazine called Games You Missed, which focuses on games published for 8-bit microcomputers from 1990 through 2010. Quantum Bovril said they're having particular trouble documenting all the late commercial and hobbyist releases on the Apple II family of platforms from that time, which surprised me a bit. But if you know about the latter Apple 8-bit scene and can help out, I'm sure they'd really appreciate it. Ron, does that ring true to you? Because I've always thought of the Apple scene as being pretty well documented internally.
I think that it's kind of one of those things that it's all of the commercial releases absolutely are well documented. There's multiple examples, scans of boxes and manuals and things like that. But there was so much software that was released where it was just somebody in their garage cranking out software. The disc goes in a sandwich bag and it gets mailed out. And a lot of that stuff is just lost to history. And I think that's why that's super important that people, kind of have a conservation mindset on those things. And if you see something, don't assume that it has been archived. Always ask around. There are lots of great online communities. There are Facebook groups, things like that, people, you can just post a picture and say, hey, is this archived? Because there is a really good chance that it isn't.
Yeah, so cool project. Good column there in Computes Gazette. And yes, to Dave's point, we had a lot of good news submissions on our subreddit, reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro, where you can join in, submit, upvote, and downvote. And we'll wrap up with a piece from Southern Grass 416, who shared a Tom's Hardware article about an unusual Apple exhibit at the Computer History Museum in Mountain View, California. It's a comedically oversized version of a Macintosh Plus, which, if you remember, had the original kind of squat rectangle form factor and tiny CRT. So although the keyboard is now giant, the screen just looks, nice and normal and acceptable to modern eyes. We'll post a link to that as well. I was reminded of the enormous SX64 project that goes around at VCF Midwest that Eric has put up for us.
Go to the subreddit and wish Duncan a happy birthday. That's your quest for today.
Good call.
Your side quest. Go and wish Duncan a happy birthday. Put a smile on Duncan's face. He deserves it after the misery that we put him through every single week.
So my story today is not a doco, and it's not about classic shooters or first-person shooters. In fact,
driving games.
It's about driving games. Yes, and how it takes an hour to drive around Hawaiian Island in Test Drive Unlimited at race speeds. It actually does, by the way. But no, in fact, the story isn't even about gaming. However, the argument is relevant as ever. Plus, it had 30 upvotes, so I'm in good company here. Shared with us by unofficial ghostwriter Dr. Local, it's actually a piece on whathifi.com by a guy called Joe Svetlik. And no, it's even though it's from whathifi.com, it's also not about how we should all have purchased a Commodore CDTV back in the day and shoved it under a hi-fi stack because that's just awesome.
It can't do visualizations, can it?
Can it?
I don't think so. Can it do visualizations?
Oh, no. For when you're listening to music. No, I don't think that was a feature.
Not in the firmware. You probably could. Yeah, you could hook up what is that? What was that? The Mind Candy or something like that. You could make it, but I don't believe that it's shipped with it.
And the annoying thing is also the LCD panel does not tell you the track number, which is another crime. I can't think why the CDTV failed.
I agree.
Anyway,
it's rubbish.
Anyway, no, Joe has he's read my friggin' mind is what he's done, and he's put into a well-written article everything wrong with, and some of the things right with, streaming services. Before I get into this story, how many streaming services do you guys subscribe to?
2.
Okay.
My number's also
Ron's
3.
saying 3? Mm-hmm. Yep. And what was yours? Sorry, Jason?
My number's also 3. Yep.
3. Okay. Interesting. So that's movie streaming, yeah? Okay. Movie and TV. 3. Paying for 3 separate services. Anyway.
So if you want to get into it, Netflix, because I'm a citizen of the 21st century. Yep. Peacock, which I get on a really good annual deal that rolls around every once in a while. And then Amazon Prime, of course, you get, however you want to look at it, you get your free shipping and they throw in some video. So.
Okay. Yeah, go Ron.
Yeah, I was going to say it's YouTube Premium because I support content like this.
Okay.
And then also Acorn and BritBox because they don't allow people in the colonies to pay for a TV license.
Right.
Yeah.
Actually, 3. I lied. I'm in 3. I forgot about YouTube Premium. Yeah, I'm in YouTube Premium as well. YouTube Premium, Netflix, and Amazon Prime because I'm just a boring person.
Yeah, fair enough. Actually, BritBox is one I've been tempted by because obviously I came from England. Anyway, in his article, Joe talks about streaming services to explain why he'll never throw out his physical media, despite being tempted to in a house move. We know the arguments already, and he raises them well. You pay monthly, you own nothing. The movie you want to watch isn't available anywhere. Even if you purchase a movie in a digital streaming service platform, there's still no guarantee it will remain there in the future. And for some services, it will actually disappear if you no longer subscribe, even if you've paid for that movie as a purchase. The main counterpoint seems to be a single one, and that is, well, how many movies will you watch more than once anyway? And that's a fair point. So having an infinite choice of movies that are almost like the one you're actually, you felt like watching, but not quite that movie, it's somehow meant to make us feel better. He likens physical media to the Seinfeld line about books, asking why you need them all and you're not going to read them again. So they're kind of like trophies. And maybe that's it. It's a
good point.
It's a very good point, right? And so whether it's movies or music or games or books, you don't need physical media. You don't need a copy of all of them. But, they can be like trophies that you can show off, you can reminisce about, but also that if you choose to, you can pick them back up off the shelf and you can go through them again because you've kept the good ones. Nikki, my wife, she kind of endures my gaming collecting habit. It's not something she indulges in herself, and she definitely doesn't fully understand it. But when it comes to movies, she's recently had a shift. On one hand, she was very close to wanting us to get rid of anything she thought we'd not watch ever again, and I resisted. And then we got gifted a big bag of DVDs and Blu-rays, I don't know, probably about 50, I reckon, Duncan, and they went on the shelf. And then I started picking them up in charity shops rather than only looking in that section, hoping to find PS2 titles. And now Nikki does the same. She'll come home from the charity shop with a handful of movies, that we know we like and that we will watch again, and we're adding them to the collection. So, guys, are you into movie collecting, and what are your habits in this area? Jason?
Yeah, I'm reminded, because we had a wave of Chris doing preservation stories. Look behind the scenes. I'm the one who does the little taglines for the Patreon teaser posts. So I think at one point I just said, somebody let Chris own something. And we're back to one of those. I would say my media aggregation habits have gone in waves. There was definitely a while where if there was anything I was just vaguely interested in, even if I was, pretty sure I was only going to watch it once, if it caught my eye, it was under $10, especially if it was DVD instead of Blu-ray, because DVD is so much easier to rip for portable playback. I just buy it. These days, yeah, we'll sometimes hit a library sale or a used media clearance and do the same, where they're virtually or actually giving the stuff away. I am also in this discussion, though, reminded of the day, and it was close to 10 years ago now. I was giving a ride to an actress about 20 years my junior, and she looked at my car and saw the actual CD jewel cases sitting there, and she just said, "Oh, of course." So, it's a demographic marker for us middle-aged nerds. Speaking of media, I hung on to this for a little while, and I guess we've done the 50 thing now. So I was going to say, Dave, when you were talking about like games didn't ship on more than 10 discs, I did a little digging and I found it on my second attempt. Chess Maniac 5 billion and one or 5 million and one, whatever it was, did ship on 12 3.5-inch floppies. So a lot of media sometimes you're in for if you're going to really commit to the bit, but not 50.
Ron, what about yourself?
Well, I used to have a pretty large movie collection, but it's really pared down over the years just because storage is always an issue. And it's true. You don't necessarily rewatch certain things, especially episodic television, over and over and over again. I know that the DVD box set was kind of a big deal, and as studios have deprioritized extra features, there's maybe less incentive to hang on to that stuff. So I do like physical media because it does allow me to loan things to other people, and where it's just, you don't have to worry about a streaming service. You don't have to worry about, is it available in their area or whatever. You can just say, hey, I'm going to pop a couple of discs in the mail for you, or somebody out in meat space. You can be like, hey, have you seen Star Trek Voyager or something? Please take this because I don't want this at my house anymore. So it's really nice that you can, kind of share those things. And I think it's also important to maybe keep a copy of things that are important to you, things that you might feel are foundational about like how you think about things. I know that the book argument is kind of one of those things. And I am someone that will pick up a book after a couple of years and reread it. I am not saying that I am rereading the Lord of the Rings trilogy every couple of years or something like that, but there might be a short book, especially like something where it's a biography or something that, to relive that experience and be closer to kind of whatever that content is. Plus, you do need something to punish your children with one day. So if you are someone that doesn't have a big media collection or something, or records or whatnot, how will you ever force your children to go through after you're gone and be like, why does dad have 6 copies of Flood by They Might Be Giants? You really, CD rot, yes, but you do want to leave them guessing as to what that might have been.
I am always crippled by FOMO, the fear of missing out. So this kind of stuff plays right into me. And in fact, I've been looking over it over the past week, but not actually for movies, but for books. I've got an e-ink reader. It's a Kobo Sage, which is a fantastic device for reading books. I still prefer physical books, but only hardbacks or trade paperbacks, and they tend to be more expensive. And normal paperbacks, I think, are worse than reading on e-ink. So when I buy books, what happens to them? Well, unlike Amazon, if I buy them from the Kobo store, and I can strip the DRM and make a permanent digital copy independent of Kobo software and online services, and that's what I like. Legally, apparently, it's a grey area. I'm not sure. I don't care. Sue me. Funnily enough, though, I do prefer digital content for film and TVs because I don't feel so much by picking up that DVD case box. I don't think there's much to it. But it doesn't exist. You can't get digital content for TV and films unless you stream it or rent it. You don't get to download something you can keep on your network attached stories. You can't put it on your NAS. It doesn't exist. So it's weird that we're in this position. Streaming and TV is fine, but you don't own it and you can't keep a copy permanently unless you do some messy, wonky procedures that degrade the quality. So the only way to have a digital library of film and TV is to buy it on physical media and then rip it to your library. And it has a problem. If I wanted to watch a film, and I did a little test myself, I picked a couple of films that I thought these are films I would go back and watch. So if I wanted to watch the film Looper, a fantastic 2012 film. For $2.99, I could rent the film, or for $4.75, I could get it new, or $2.60, I could get it used, delivered to me. All three of those prices seem fine. But I couldn't get it right now. I'd have to wait until tomorrow to do that. But if we go to a 2024 film, The Substance, for example, it's £3.49 to stream. I don't know the quality of that stream, though. £3.49 to stream, or £10 to buy it on Blu-ray, or £20 to buy it on UHD Blu-ray. So would I be watching that film more than 6 times? Absolutely not. Maybe I'd watch it one more time. Maybe if I'm still here in 30 years, I'll watch it again. But I already saw it at the cinema. So maybe it's bargain hunting, second-hand, used, and maybe Nikki and Chris have the right idea for it. Maybe I should be going to somewhere else where there's lots of second-hand DVDs and picking a dozen off the shelf and paying 20 quid for that, and then saying that's fine. When I want to go and watch a film, I can browse through them like it's the video store in 1987. I don't know. That seems the right way for me. But I want to be able to buy a digital copy of a film and stick it in my library forever.
I think if you're going to buy them, now's the time, because they're all over charity shops and e-waste stores at your local tip. If you have that kind of thing, that you pick them up for pittance. You hit on some really important points, I feel, there, Dave. Even when you were talking about your books, why would that be a legal grey area to back up the file of an ebook that you've paid for and downloaded? That to me is insane. And I did work a few years ago in the sort of investigating the ebook space and the DRM surrounding it. And there was lots of different formats at the time. EPUB was the most open source, if you can put it that way, and very easy to back up and use on any device, and not being linked into a certain subscription service. So, yeah, for that to be called a legal grant, why? You've paid for it. And same with digital movies. I remember a few years ago when you bought a DVD, you got the option for a digital version of the movie, which I expected to be a file download like a DivX or something like that. And it wasn't. It was a login to a service to watch the movie that I also had on disc. But once that service disappeared, guess what? I couldn't watch the movie I'd paid for. Ron?
I was just going to say, here in the States, we have this little thing called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act that
DCMA,
which very much limits what you can do to circumnavigate copy protection on things like that. So I think that's why it is also very important that we do our best to support companies that support consumers by having open formats and companies that release things or basically have a way to maybe for an additional charge even release something from whatever draconian copyright protection that they might have added to like an ebook or movie or whatnot.
Yeah, the grey area I talked about isn't so much making a backup. As far as I know, that's okay. It's the process of making the backup means smashing their protection off, and that's the DCMA problem.
Yeah.
It's the protection, and I guess it's protected. Yeah.
The reason is they don't want you copying it, giving it to somebody else. So
that's right.
But at the end of the day, you've paid for something; it's yours.
Because I might give it to you for free.
I probably wouldn't read it.
You can't even read.
Yeah. Well, and there's also sort of a legal thing where it's like, I own these things. Shouldn't I be able to leave them to someone else? I know that's a huge conversation, but I think that's why, especially physical media is very important, and having a plan for how those things are going to be handled after you're gone.
Or dare I say, on-sell them, once you're bored of it. And you can't do that if it's a digital version. I find it interesting that TV series get lumped in with the things you probably wouldn't rewatch, because we're a household that has rewatched Friends about 3 times. We'll still watch it even if it's on TV. We're going through Farscape. I swear that's for the 3rd time. Chuck is another series we love. Buffy, we've been through that at least twice. So yeah, we will regularly rewatch TV off the discs off the shelf. Yeah. Sorry, Dave.
I watched Sopranos last year for the 2nd time, and I got so much more out of watching it the 2nd time around. So yeah, there are certain things I'd like to watch again. So we're going well over this week. Sorry, Duncan. Happy birthday.
No, I'll quickly, happy birthday, Duncan. I'll quickly close this one off. I don't pay for a single streaming service. I leech certain services for a while. And if I lose that service, I don't miss it. Although I am glad we didn't lose Netflix mid Cobra Kai. And there is, now I'm not going to slow down collecting DVDs and Blu-rays. In fact, we're going to ramp that up. And not just because I feel it's important to keep and own physical media, but because, well, depending on the year of release, they change things. I'm sorry, but in Demolition Man, the winner of the franchise wars, even in regions outside of the USA, was Taco Bell. Well, if you buy a later print, apparently it was Pizza Hut. Logo's changed and audio is poorly dubbed just so that it can say Pizza Hut. And that just ruins the nostalgia of watching an old movie in the version that you remember watching it. And I think that's why I, like many collectors, are now also interested in VHS titles as well, because you know it's going to be an early release of that, right? You can update, change, censor, and adapt whatever you like on your streaming services, but you can't do that to any of the ones on my shelf, and that's how it should be.
On to the community question of the week, where we are out of contest mode. Chris, would you like to do the honors?
I will. In fact, our question from last week was, what are your strategies for getting away from the doom scroll and the overly connected life? So if we're out of contest mode, let's jump in and
Duncan had one.
see. Did Duncan have one? What was Duncan's?
Yeah, he said, I think the simplest is the best. Just delete your account or the app. Says 50-year-old Duncan.
Absolutely. Who wants to take number one?
I'll take that. Robert Crowther, I have a rule. No Facebook on my phone. Technically, it's no Meta on my phone, but I think it sounds better with the original company name. This means I don't have most of the doom scrolling apps. That, I would say, is debatable.
Yeah, that's more than one. Osprey Shire says, when opening YouTube, I've started clicking the subscriptions button to find videos from creators I know I want to watch rather than scrolling through the served up AI slop. I still look through the feed every now and then to find new channels, but then quickly subscribe and follow those through the subscription feed.
Ron, did you want to read out number 3?
Yes, I certainly can. Just to make sure that is the one that's electric pause.
Yep,
That's right.
Okay, excellent. Deleting the apps on my phone is the best solution for things I am not interested in seeing, all such as Facebook, then limiting myself on other apps such as Reddit, and only viewing the home feed. There's a couple of buttons that you need to find to stop suggesting things, but choosing a video from a description or a subscription on YouTube. Away from the phone, I switched to using Zen browser with DuckDuckGo and an ad blocker, which made the internet a far better experience. I'm also trying to find time to create my own webpage and spend more time browsing on the indie web /NeoCities, which contained user-generated content reminiscent of the 90s web.
That'd be nice.
This question also revealed who engages with the question of the week before watching / listening to the entire episode.
Yes.
Because the next one down was like, I have a brick. It's this NFC thing. You have to tap your phone on it to unlock it. And 2 people jump in. That's such a good idea. And of course, we're sitting here going, yes, which Dave talked about, 45 minutes through the episode. But
We really should have mentioned that.
There's no wrong way. There's no wrong way to answer the community question of the week. Just it did tip off that, okay, you guys haven't caught the episode yet.
To be fair, I used to be the worst commenter on YouTube. I'd always comment before finishing the video. I don't do
I
so
do like
much
to see
now.
an edited comment that way. But anyway, keep the comments coming. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Do we have a sorry, Ron, you were going to say something.
Oh, no, that's why that I always make sure that when I leave a comment on a video I haven't watched, I always put second.
Nice.
Do we have a question of the week?
We do have a new question of the week, which will be, what retro tech would you try to revive with $1 billion research and development budget? Dream big.
$1 billion.
Yep. Dream big, dream small, as long as it's retro tech and it can
CDTV
absorb
too.
$1 billion in R&D.
You can make it good this time around. Thank you for joining us, Ron. It's been a pleasure. If people want to see more of you, what should they do?
Well, I would say that you can always find out what I'm doing next at my website, which is ronscompvids.com. You can also find me on YouTube at Ron's Computer Videos. And I would definitely recommend that everybody head over to marchintosh.com and check out the cool event that will be happening just in a few days from when this broadcasts.
Thank you, Duncan, for being with us for 50 years. Thank you for enduring this ridiculously over the limit episode. I don't know how this happened. Sorry about that, Duncan. Happy birthday. I know you're doing something special this way, and I hope you enjoy it. But thank you for being the hardest working of all of the 4 of us. See you next week, Twirlers.
Bye.
Bye all.
Oh, waving.
We're all waving.
Bye.
This Week in Retro was written and presented by Chris from 005 AGIMA, Jason from the Retro Adventurers, and Dave. It was edited by me, Duncan Styles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcast app, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/This Week in Retro to suggest and vote on the stories we cover on the show. Please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you enjoy our show and would like to support it, then please check out the link to our Patreon page in the show notes or description. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.